Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Scandalous Hamiltons, a Gilded Age Grifter, a Founding Father's Disgraced Descendant, and a Trial at the Dawn of Tabloid Journalism, by Bill Shaffer. Narrated by David Colacci. Introduction. Had the Hamilton story that unfolds in these chapters occurred today, it would merit blanket coverage on cable news and provide ample fodder for a barrage of biting headlines on the front pages of the New York tabloids. Conspiracy theories would be breathlessly tweeted from those laying claim to inside information. Rumors and innuendo would be passed along sotto voce at fashionable New York dinner parties. A perfectly tawdry tale involving a Founding Father's descendant would be impossible to ignore. During the Gilded Age, however, the only medium available for breaking news was the newspaper. In 1889, there were 1,492 daily newspapers published in the United States. An additional 14,787 monthlies, weeklies, and semi-weeklies printed in America's largest cities and smallest towns fueled the nation's insatiable appetite for news. There were 19 English-language dailies published in New York City alone, joined by a host of others published in the native languages of recently arrived immigrants. The largest New York dailies, the World, Tribune, Herald, Sun, and Times, had a combined total of 475,000 daily readers, almost one newspaper for every 3 citizens of New York. The 1890 population of New York City totaled 1.51 million people, the city of Brooklyn 806,000. Telegraph networks and the recently formed Associated Press allowed for news stories published in one part of the United States to be transmitted across the country to run simultaneously in editions nationwide. The rise of yellow journalism in the last decades of the 19th century, epitomized by Joseph Pulitzer's New York World, marked a turning point in the public consumption of news. Publishers increasingly sought to capture the attention of their audience by printing provocative headlines and titillating stories rife with hearsay and gossip. Articles that recounted violent crimes, attempted blackmail, prostitution, alcohol-induced mayhem, morphine addiction, or a mysterious death were lapped up by readers thirsty for even a hint of scandal. The story of the tumultuous 5-year relationship between Robert Ray Hamilton and the woman born as Evangeline Steele combined every one of these elements. For the New York dailies, Ray and Eva were heaven-sent, an unexpected gift wrapped in truths, half-truths, and lies. When the salacious details of the Hamilton story emerged in August 1889, dailies were typically published as 8-page editions with 8 columns per page. The front page might feature up to 20 short articles laid out over those 8 columns, the sea of text broken up only by an occasional small illustration. For a story to command a full column on page 1, it had to be sensationally newsworthy. From the outset, the Hamilton drama played out not only in full columns on page 1, but in multiple columns that continued on to the interior pages. The headlines used as chapter titles in this book are representative of the many articles about the Hamiltons. Why was such attention paid to Robert Ray Hamilton and Evangeline Steele? In the 19th century, the Hamilton name was recognized by all Americans and almost universally revered, akin at the time to the Kennedy name today. In 1804, the news of Alexander Hamilton being shot in a duel with Aaron Burr produced the same level of shock as the news of JFK's assassination in 1963. 58 years after Dallas, our interest is still piqued when we hear the Kennedy name in the news. So, too, with the Hamilton name long after that fatal event in Weehawken, New Jersey. Members of the Hamilton family were listed in the social register, well known in political and financial circles, and many were members of Ward McAllister's 400, the pinnacle of New York society. 400 is the number of guests said to fit comfortably in Mrs. Astor's ballroom. Men like Ray Hamilton, born into the upper classes of the Gilded Age, traded stocks and real estate, entered into socially acceptable professions, the law, finance, medicine, and spent a fair share of their time with other members of their class idling in private clubs and fine restaurants. Their life of privilege was assumed from birth. Conversely, Eva was raised dirt poor in the northeast Pennsylvania coal country, the daughter of an alcoholic, itinerant logger. Women who were born into difficult circumstances and who weren't afforded much of an education had to scratch and claw for everything they obtained in life. If that scratching and clawing flirted with the law or social norms, so be it. They did what they had to do to get by. And while Ray's name and identity were clearly defined at birth, Eva used multiple surnames over the course of her life: Steele, Parsons, Brill, Mann, Hamilton, and Gall, and claimed at various times to be from New Jersey, Pennsylvania, or New York. This was easy to do during the 19th century. There were no such things as photo IDs, social security numbers, or background checks. You were, quite simply, whoever you said you were. The ability to invent and reinvent one's identity was particularly useful for a person who may have been inclined to engage in illegal or nefarious activities. The newspapers had a field day contrasting Eva's hard-scrabble roots with Ray's inherited wealth and privilege. Members of the working class who poured through newspapers like the World reveled in stories about the vulnerability of the rich and powerful, comforted in some way by the knowledge that even the privileged were susceptible to the vicissitudes of life, just like them. Beyond following the blow-by-blow accounts of the events that transpired beginning in August 1889, readers were intrigued by Ray's and Eva's disparate socio-economic backgrounds and how a man of his stature could become entangled with a woman regularly described by the press as a bold adventuress. And one unanswered question hung over the entire drama: how could such a seemingly smart man be so stupid? As Ray Hamilton left little record of his own judgment about the matter, it is difficult to conclusively determine his feelings about his life with Eva. What Ray did leave, however, was a lasting memorial in his own name, the Hamilton Fountain. It remains today at 76th Street and Riverside Drive in New York, more than 100 years after it was set in place. Today, children splash their hands in the fountain's basin, and local residents stroll past the outstretched wings of its crowning eagle, few of them knowing the long-forgotten Hamilton story and the fountain's raison d'être. Attached to a lamp-post adjacent to the fountain is a small plaque put in place by the New York City Parks Department that offers a brief biography of Ray Hamilton, explains the significance of ornamental fountains in early 20th century parks, and mentions a public scandal involving Eva Mann, who he had secretly married, and who had used this alliance to raid his substantial financial holdings. That one line piqued the curiosity of this author, and instigated a search through court records, case files, personal correspondence, and archival material, in an effort to learn more about this mysterious public scandal involving Robert Ray Hamilton and the woman the Parks Department referred to as Eva Mann. While these materials certainly provide pertinent details about their relationship, it is through the dramatic newspaper accounts that ran nationwide during the last years of the 19th century that we learn of the public fascination with Ray and Eva and the white light of media attention that focused on the regrettable decisions made by these two ill-fated figures of the Gilded Age. Chapter 1. In the Woman's Power. On Monday, January 7, 1889, an unlikely couple crossed the Hudson River from Manhattan to Paterson, New Jersey, to be married. Robert Ray Hamilton and Eva Brill were improbable candidates to become husband and wife. During the course of their 4-year relationship they had maintained separate lives and spent as much time apart from each other as they had together. A wealthy attorney and real estate investor, Ray also represented the fashionable Murray Hill district in the New York State Assembly from 1884 to 1888, and spent a great deal of time in Albany, only seeing Eva when he returned to the city on weekends. When Ray was away, Eva associated with a dubious collection of friends and acquaintances who were far removed from the stature of her soon-to-be husband. The birth of their first child out of wedlock, 3 weeks before their journey to Paterson, provided the impetus for Eva to convince Ray to marry her. After 4 years, Eva's ambition to become Mrs. Robert Ray Hamilton was about to triumph over Ray's indifference to legalizing their relationship. The Pavonia Ferry ran between Jersey City and Chambers Street in Lower Manhattan. The wood-clad steamer bobbed through the chop of the Hudson on its 15-minute journey across the river, briefly slowing to square up to its Jersey City terminal before the engines revved, smoke belched from its stacks, and the captain made his final push into the pier. In warm weather, passengers lined the open bow front of the Pavonia to see the blocky silhouettes of factories and warehouses that lined the Jersey waterfront come into focus as the ferry neared the shore. On a cold January day, though, a bench inside the cabin would be the seat of choice for a couple seeking shelter from the winter winds that blew up the Hudson from New York Harbor. Ray and Eva's trek to Paterson, 2 stops inland from the ferry on an Erie Railroad branch line, ended at the Market Street Methodist Episcopal Church. The 40-year-old, russet-colored stone church in the center of town was topped by a hexagonal white steeple that rose to one of the highest points in the city. Neither Ray nor Eva were congregants of the Market Street Church, but it was sufficiently out of the way as to not bring undue attention to the couple. The pastor, Reverend Edson Burr, no relation to Aaron Burr, had never met Ray or Eva before they knocked on his door and asked to be married. Reverend Burr held a Doctor of Divinity degree from Wesleyan University, was a staunch believer in the doctrines of his faith, and cherished every opportunity to preach the gospel. Above all, he believed that a Christian minister had a responsibility to speak as a defender of truth. His obligation to the truth extended beyond the eyes of God. For a wedding to be legally recognized in New Jersey, the state required that the truth be told by all applicants. Accordingly, Reverend Burr was duty-bound to gather pertinent information from the couple standing before him. Boyishly handsome, Ray looked 10 years younger than 38, his age at the time of the wedding. Thin and of medium height, he had jet-black hair and a full mustache that extended fully across his upper lip and connected with bushy sideburns. Ray wore the sharply tailored, narrow suits popular at the time, his jacket properly buttoned over a crisp white shirt, finished with a Warville collar and a Windsor tie firmly knotted against his neck. He carried himself with the confidence and manners befitting a gentleman of his upbringing. Timothy Sullivan, a friend and colleague of Hamilton's in Albany, described him as that thoroughbred dude. Complying with Reverend Burr's directive, Ray registered as Robert R. Hamilton, a lawyer by profession. He noted his birthplace as New York City, and that he was the son of Schuyler Hamilton and Cornelia Ray. Eva's appearance belied her impoverished childhood in eastern Pennsylvania coal country. She wore fitted jackets that tapered at her waist over long, pleated, tulip-shaped skirts, her chestnut blonde hair swept up under a matching hat. Strands of pearls encircled her long neck, her ensemble accessorized with jeweled brooches and earrings. Eva entered her full name in the registry as Evangeline L. Steele, age 29, birthplace Tunkhannock, Pennsylvania, and stated that she was the daughter of William Steele and Leda Cheevers. As the average age for marriage at the time was 26 for men and 22 for women, Ray and Eva were anomalous to the couples Reverend Burr normally joined in matrimony. He asked if either of them had been married previously, to which they both answered no. Reverend Burr also had an obligation to ensure that 2 witnesses were present to attest to the nuptials. As Ray and Eva had traveled to the Market Street Church alone, no family or friends accompanied them across the Hudson, and no one met them upon their arrival in Paterson, Burr recruited his wife Josephine and his mother-in-law Harriet Hill to serve as witnesses to the marriage of these strangers from New York. With everything in order, Reverend Burr performed the ceremony, documents were signed, and the certificate of marriage was sent to the Bureau of Vital Statistics at Paterson City Hall. If Ray had conformed to the expectations of his family and social circle, his wedding would have taken place at Calvary Church on 4th Avenue in Manhattan, around the corner from Gramercy Park. The handsome Gothic Revival brownstone was home to congregants from some of the most prominent family names in New York, Astor, Roosevelt, and Vanderbilt, as well as Hamilton. The ceremony and reception would have been chronicled in gushing detail in the newspapers, the guest list filled with names plucked from the pages of the Social Register. Ray's bride would have hailed from another prominent New York family. She would not have been a woman of undetermined character. By contrast, Eva would likely have been married by a country preacher in rural Pennsylvania, with a few family members and a scattering of townsfolk in attendance, the reception organized around a potluck and moonshine. Ray, born in 1851, was the eldest of 3 sons born to General Schuyler Hamilton, a decorated veteran of both the Mexican-American and Civil Wars, and Cornelia Ray, daughter of wealthy New Yorker Robert Ray. His younger brother, Schuyler Hamilton, Jr., was born in 1853. The youngest son, Charles Apthorpe Hamilton, born in 1858, died of natural causes at age 17. The grandfather of Ray, Schuyler, Jr., and Charles was noted historian and biographer John Church Hamilton, and their great-grandfather was founding father Alexander Hamilton. Much was expected from Ray, Schuyler, Jr., their cousins, schoolmates, and friends. Their families produced politicians, statesmen, financiers, respected legal minds, and leading businessmen. They went to the best schools and married daughters of other wealthy and socially connected families. Ray's generation came of age in the 1870s and 1880s, just as the spectacular riches of the Gilded Age became manifest, visible to rich and poor alike. Eva's father, William Steele, was a hard-drinking woodcutter who moved his family of 6 children from one logging camp to another to find work. Anthracite coal was king in the northeast corner of Pennsylvania when Eva was born. It was dug out of the Appalachian hills and used to fire the mills that forged the steel rails used by the railroads to haul carloads of coal out of the Wyoming Valley and across the country. The industrialization of America was on full display around Tunkhannock, but the fortunes gained from coal mining and the railroads didn't line the pockets of local laborers. It was the barons associated with the likes of Ray Hamilton who reaped the benefits of the back-breaking work performed by men like William Steele. The Hamilton family had a long association with Columbia College, beginning with Alexander's enrollment at King's College in 1774. Exactly 100 years later, Ray graduated from Columbia Law School and was admitted to the New York City Bar. Eva was educated in a one-room schoolhouse in a hamlet in Sullivan County, Pennsylvania, until she left school at age 15. The consensus in the community was that she wasn't going to be bright. But even though Eva lacked much of a formal education, she learned at an early age that men, regardless of their class, were beguiled by her bright eyes, curvy figure, and a smile that betrayed just a hint of mischief. Ray Hamilton was no exception. The newlyweds chose not to linger in Paterson after the ceremony, returning to Manhattan by the end of their wedding day. While Ray had agreed to marry Eva on short notice, he made no provision for them to live under the same roof. Ray lived alone on West 14th Street, and Eva lived in a boarding house on East 33rd Street. An older widow, Anna Swinton, and her adult son, Joshua Mann, boarded in an adjacent room. Eva had left their infant daughter, Beatrice, in Mrs. Swinton's care while she traveled to Paterson for her wedding. When the newlyweds arrived back in the city, Ray went his way and Eva hers. Eva had no issue with this arrangement, as her new husband had made plans for them to begin an extended trip to California in March, with an eye to making their permanent home in San Diego. San Diego had become more easily accessible to Easterners via the Transcontinental Railroad 4 years before Ray and his new family set out on their journey. Only 5,000 people lived in the sleepy seaside town when the first California Southern trains arrived in 1885. The railroad brought an influx of new residents, including real estate investors like Ray Hamilton, who rushed in to buy prime oceanfront property. Dilapidated, clapboard buildings were torn down to build hotels and shops. Omnibuses began to operate on freshly paved streets, and the nearby Sweetwater River was dammed up to supply fresh water to a population that had swelled to nearly 30,000 residents. Ray's real estate portfolio was extensive, but limited to New York City. Deeds of surrender for properties that were owned by the Hamilton family were routinely swapped between the general and his 2 sons. Ray also held an interest in the Prescott House, an elegant 6-story hotel at Broadway and Spring Street, and owned undeveloped lots uptown on 29th and 30th Street. He understood the influence of infrastructure on development and could afford to speculate. Ray bought property as far north as 93rd Street and 8th Avenue when the success of the 9th Avenue L, New York's first elevated train, spurred a building boom on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. And when the Brooklyn Bridge opened in 1883, connecting the city of Brooklyn with New York, Ray purchased farmland on the far side of the bridge in Gravesend, speculating that the area was ripe for new housing. By 1889, his holdings throughout the entire city of Brooklyn consisted of 32 homes and 31 vacant lots. The stunning, undeveloped coastline of Southern California, though, presented development opportunities that were not possible on the more densely populated East Coast. But for all of the promise of riches that San Diego held out to a savvy investor, Eva surmised that Ray's actual intention for their trip was to shield their clandestine wedding and new baby from his family and friends. He had kept his relationship with Eva a secret from the outset and informed no one, not even his father and brother, of his marriage and fatherhood. By spending an extended period of time almost 3,000 miles away from home, Eva reasoned that Ray could plausibly return to the East Coast and explain that he had met her in California, where they married and had a child. Duplicity and connivance came naturally to Eva. Over the course of her lifetime, she concocted stories that changed depending on her audience or the circumstances in which she found herself at any particular time. Facts were fungible. Anecdotes were sometimes rooted in the truth and sometimes cut from whole cloth. Eva told some acquaintances that she was orphaned at a young age and adopted by the Steeles. To others, she said that her birth mother and father were wealthy and lived in Passaic, New Jersey. She described herself as an actress and a performer, but had no stage credits to support her claim. The tapestry of fact and fiction that Eva had woven about her life was unneeded in San Diego. She arrived with a new husband, a new baby, and a new name. She knew no one in town, and had no need to spin tales about her past. Before their departure from New York, Ray and Eva had hired Mary Ann Donnelly, a wet nurse, to accompany them on their journey west. In the late 1800s, it was common for wealthy families to hire a wet nurse, either because of a mother's inability to lactate or an unwillingness to feed her own child. The only real alternative to breast milk at the time was cow's milk. Infant formula did not come into widespread use until the beginning of the 20th century. Wet nurses were often held in low regard by the well-to-do who hired them, as they came from lower social classes, eager to overcome their desperate circumstances. They were generally perceived to be coarse, unruly, and ignorant, and the physicians who recommended them to wealthy families admitted that they had at least one virtue that overshadowed their many alleged vices: their milk saved babies' lives. During the course of the Hamiltons' stay in San Diego, Eva's relationship with her own coarse and unruly wet nurse, Mary Ann Donnelly, grew increasingly argumentative. While Ray may have relished the fresh start for his new family in the West, Eva did not. Whether due to the change in climate, being so far from home, or adapting to her new role as a mother, she was unwell. Eva lost 40 pounds and began drinking heavily. After only 4 months in Southern California, a decision was taken to return east, summering at the Jersey Shore before returning to New York at the end of August. Lending credence to Eva's theory regarding Ray's real motivation for moving to San Diego, it wasn't until they had returned to the East Coast that Ray informed his father of his marriage and fatherhood. The General, in turn, passed the news on to Ray's younger brother, Schuyler, Jr. Croton Landing, New York, August 7th, 1889. Dear Ray, I heard last night from Father of your marriage and that I am an uncle. I am glad the lady is handsome and the baby sweet and pretty. I think they are the greatest comforts one can have in this life. Sometime in the future, if agreeable to you, I would like to run down and see the family. I think my little niece will find a tender spot in my heart for her. What is her name? Hope your wife and little one may add much happiness to your life. I remain, your loving brother, Schuyler. Send their pictures, especially if they are good-looking. Chapter 2. A Woman's Ready Dagger. Monday, August 26th, 1889. It was an unseasonably cool start to the last week of August in Atlantic City, with the temperature reaching a high of just 70 degrees for the day. Rain was not expected, however, so as the sun rose above the grand hotels and quaint cottages that lined the seashore, the throng of seasonal residents lodged in guest rooms from Missouri to Massachusetts avenues prepared to do what vacationers had done since trains started bringing Philadelphians to the Jersey Shore in the 1850s, go to the beach. The 10,000 year-round residents of this coastal resort town were joined each summer by 65,000 visitors who arrived throughout June, July, and August to idle their days away by the seaside. Some would spend their time fully immersed in the warm Atlantic surf, others wading in no farther than their ankles, all of them mugging for pictures or collecting seashells to have as keepsakes of their summer holiday at the shore. Those who preferred not to contend with the sand and water could remain on the 4-mile-long boardwalk that spanned the length of the beach, strolling to see and be seen. Tourist pamphlets recommended the boardwalk as a place to observe every aspect of the human character, declaring that a day spent on the crowded thoroughfare was worth a year in ordinary life. Some would choose to navigate the boardwalk riding in a novelty introduced to Atlantic City several years prior, the rolling chair. A modified wheelchair enclosed in a wicker shell, the rolling chair was popular with knobs and swells, moneyed vacationers who not only rented a chair for the day, but hired a man to push them up and down the boardwalk as well. The occupants of these two-person transports glided past the Windsor, Traymore, Dennis, and other grand hotels that lined the beach, observing the comings and goings of the well-to-do, occasionally stopping to say hello to friends or business associates who were also summering in Atlantic City. The streets just inland from the boardwalk were filled with quaint Victorian inns and cottages that featured steeply gabled roofs, cupolas and long shaded porches that wrapped around their shingled exteriors. These innkeepers offered accommodations on only one or two floors, providing an option for those vacationers who sought both a quieter.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?